the smile on this kid's face just gave me it gave me the fuel and the reason why I do what I do. Sometimes as a young person, I slip up. Like last year, I reacted to trolls and, wanted to take on the world and wanted to fight everyone. But really, I go back to that reason why I do what I do. And that is the magic of Deadly Science. That's why this simple white logo on a black shirt means something. And it means something to so many people is because of those moments.
Welcome to the Protect the World podcast. Every month, I connect with a different not-for-profit organisation that's making the world a better place. My goal is to learn about the issues they're tackling, interview the founder or director, and then share their stories with you. But I don't just want to share their stories. I want to contribute to their work as well. If you'd like to help me, you can sign up to the Patreon via the link in the show notes. The voice you heard at the beginning of this podcast belongs to Corey Tutt, founder and CEO of DeadlyScience and the very first guest to feature on this show. DeadlyScience is an Australian not-for-profit with the goal of increasing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander participation in science. In Australia, around 5% of the population has a university degree in STEM. But for Indigenous Australians, that figure is 0.5%, and it's even lower in regional and remote areas. Schools in these areas can be drastically under-resourced, so Corey founded DeadlyScience in 2018 with the goal of providing STEM-related resources to remote schools and connecting young Indigenous people with pathways in STEM. Since then, DeadlyScience has grown into Australia's leading Indigenous science organisation. They work with over 800 schools across the continent, to which they've delivered more than 25,000 books. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples were Australia's first scientists, and they've cared for these lands for more than 65,000 years. Through DeadlyScience, Corey is carrying on the traditions of his ancestors and sparking joy and passion for the next generation of Indigenous scientists. I've been a fan of DeadlyScience for a number of years now, and it was an absolute honour to have Corey as the first guest on this show. A few quick notes before we jump into the podcast, though. Firstly, I should probably have got Corey to explain this, but for any confused international listeners right now, when we say deadly science, we're not referring to Australia's wildlife. When an Indigenous person calls something deadly, it means it's awesome or cool. And secondly, I recorded this interview just after the release of Corey's brand new book. Corey's written 10 books, including the Deadly Science series for Australian Geographic and The First Scientists, which highlights Indigenous contributions to scientific knowledge. His latest work is called This Book Thinks You're Deadly, and is a celebration of Black excellence in Australia, featuring profiles of 80 amazing Indigenous Australians. The book perfectly exemplifies what Corey is trying to achieve. It's designed to inspire Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander youth and foster an enthusiastic sense of pride in their culture.
I wrote this book entirely on planes whilst travelling last year for work. So you got to kind of do something on those Qantas Link planes out of Port Macquarie. So I wrote this book and I kind of, I wouldn't call myself an activist, but I get motivated by things that, I find wrong in society, which is a bit silly. But we don't really have a First Nations science book, so I wrote First Scientists. We don't really have a book that celebrates Aboriginal people in Australia, so I wrote This Book Thinks You're Deadly. So it's kind of like, everything that I do is kind of like, oh, wow, I wish I had this kind of book when I was younger, or I wish I had this kind of book that celebrates this amazing person in this community who does incredible work that I've connected with over the last few years. So that's kind of how the concept starts, is, the creation concept of how I start with books and things like that. And it's First Scientist was born out of the necessity to decolonize the lab coat, because we constantly talk about Albert Einstein and Thomas Edison. Majority of scientists in Australia come from people of colour, are women, are young people as well, and we tend to focus on one demographic as scientists, and that creates a big problem, especially in the chain of scientists. The baby fish in the pond, they don't see themselves as big fish eventually, and I think that's really important, that young people actually see what an image of a scientist is, so we can change it. It's the same as like being a firefighter. Like, every firefighter as a kid you think of a male, but a lot of firefighters are female. A lot of firefighters are different backgrounds, but predominantly firefighters that we see are Anglo-Saxon males. But I know a lot of Aboriginal firefighters and different people. So, we need to decolonize our thinking. That demographic of society only makes up 8% of the world. The world is not necessarily majority white. And when we grow up in Australia, we think that the world is white. But we need room for all cultures, and yeah.
I'm interested. You said before that you don't describe yourself as an activist. Why is that?
Mainly because, for me, I'm quite happy with my life. I mean, I'm quite content, and when, I'm not going to go chain myself to a fence. I'd rather change the world by creating really great content and things that people enjoy. Because I think, we're really quick to draw on anger, because anger is an accelerant for change. And when you have an accelerant and you put it on fire, it burns too quickly and the fire burns out. But if you are to, if you're able to just, chuck a log in every now and again, or manage a fire and keep it going, then you create change over time. And I guess for me, it's not necessarily about change. It's about giving people things that they deserve. So, our kids deserve great First Nations books that explain science in a holistic, not an objective way. They deserve books that, kids can open up a page and they can read about some incredible Aboriginal people, and hopefully they develop an interest based off those people and a role model. These are things that our people deserve. Every Australian or every human deserves access to education or health. And for me, it's more like I'm kind of one of these people that just tries to get in there and do it. I try to get in there and make a difference where I can. So, often I have a lot of a lot of Aboriginal people that come to my office every day in the warehouse. I'm not there today, but they sit in my warehouse and we just have a yarn, or my phone rings constantly. So I call it the Deadly Hotline. And, as I've grown older, I've realized that, things that I experienced in my childhood are probably not things that the normal person would experience. And there's two ways you can handle it. You can handle it by looking after your mental health and packing up a box of Lego or books, or that it's such a mindfulness task, because you're often by yourself in the middle of the night or the middle of the day, and you're packing it off to a community that's hundreds of kilometers away. And, you don't know if it's going to get there or not. So there's that apprehension of what are they going to think of this box that you've packed and you've spent this time packing? But then it's at the same time, you could go the other way. You could be really angry. I didn't get the opportunities that everyone else gets, or perhaps it's because I grew up without my dad. I remember I got asked to go play rugby union, rugby league over in Japan and Fiji as a kid, and I couldn't go because in Australia you need both parents to sign your passport, but I couldn't go because my father was, nowhere Like, he wasn't there. So, there's things like that you can be angry about, but then how can I influence, how can I go into schools and help kids that experience the same thing, have the same access to me as a scientist, or as as someone that writes books, or whatever. What can I do then? So I'm nowhere near a megastar or a footy star, but occasionally people stop me for a photo, or they run up to me at the shops and they want a book signed, or they I'm out at the markets with my wife and someone will say, I really like your work, or like, thank you very much. I always try and make those moments, even if I'm not feeling the best, I'll always try and make those moments special, because those are the moments where when someone's down in the dumps, they go, oh, that Corey guy, he was really nice to me, and he made an effort. It is still a bit weird to me. I went to the Writers' Festivals last year and had 200 people, kids, getting my book signed, and it took me ages to finish, because I'd always write a paragraph in there. And I always make them different for every person, because it's if I can control that and how I interact with people, especially young people, then, that can be something that lasts with them forever. And whether I'm in a bad mood or I'm sick, or, or if, things just haven't gone to plan that day, it's not their fault. It's not their fault that it hasn't gone to plan. So my attitude really doesn't, it really affects them in that moment and that interaction with me for that brief moment of time. So I kind of just drop everything and just try and make it about them, because it's, it's such a humbling experience when someone does buy your book and support you in that way.
Absolutely, mate. It's it's really inspiring, because you're a real role model to these kids, I think. And I love that metaphor you just talked about with the, stoking a log on the fire every now and then rather than burning out. And I think you're really embodying that message for the kids that you're working with. So I'm really, really impressed with the work you're doing.
And on that, Brody, I'm not a perfect person, and no one listening to this should think that I'm perfect. I have my flaws. I've had to work really hard on overcoming, certain traumas and things like that to be where I am today. And that takes time. So if anyone is listening that is embarking on social change, my one bit of unsolicited advice that I do not take is don't be so hard on yourself, because we all come from different walks of life. I've met guys that have been in prison that have started charities, and they're the nicest pies ever. They're nicest pie, and they're deadly. And I've met people that have started charities that, it's purely a business for them. They're selling social good, and there's all different types of the spectrum in people that are undertaking this kind of work. But there's one thing we all have in common, and that's we're all our own harshest critics. So, it is what it is, but you got to be kind.
Absolutely. That's really great advice, and it's so hard when you're putting that effort in, and maybe it's not quite hitting the mark or where you think it's going to be. And to remember that you are making that change, no matter where you're starting, I guess. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about how did DeadlyScience start? What was the story behind it?
Yeah, so I was working in a lab as an animal technician, and to be honest, a couple of years earlier, I'd been doing more of the technical side of that role, and I was managing some breeding colonies. At the time, I hit a bit of a roadblock. I was, my girlfriend at the time had broken up with me, and I was in a bad space again. And it wasn't the first time I'd been in a bad space, mentally. And that's why I'm really passionate about mental health, because I know how easy it is to fall into those traps of, self-doubt. And I guess I was in one of those spots, and I've always had this drive just to, if I'm not challenged by something, I'll find the next challenge. So like with that role, I'd kind of done everything in that role that I could do, and kind of like a game of Snake, man. Like I was just hitting walls because I was just like, there was nothing left to challenge me in that role. It's quite a complex role and it's complicated, right? But it just, once I'd solved the puzzle of how to do everything in that job, then it was kind of it, right? So I started, and I dealt with quite a bit of racism in the workplace at that point. Like I'd be in the lab and stuff, and the odd person would make a comment like, we'd wash our hands with ethanol for like to prevent disease with like mice and stuff. And over the years, I've probably had maybe a dozen or so comments like, "Oh, don't give him the ethanol, or he's an abo," like that kind of stuff. And at the time, you don't really say anything about it because you kind of like you're a bit scared to sort of like come up, like to say something back or like complain or anything like that. It's really difficult. So I kind of just dealt with it, but it did like enter me inside, and I was like, I would get sad about it. I'd kind of laugh it off, but I would get really sad about it. And then I decided, like, because I didn't go to uni when I first left school. I left school at 16 and went to Western Australia as a 16-year-old. Left home at 16, went and worked in a wildlife sanctuary, came back, became a zookeeper, did alpaca shearing for a bit, went to the animal shelters, became a dog trainer, then did the science stuff afterwards. So I went the long way around, and I really wanted to connect with our people, my people, the Gamilaraay and different Aboriginal groups from around Sydney, and really just tell them like, hey, like, if you want to do science, you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it the white fella way. You can do it the black fella way. Or you can, whatever way you want to do it, you can do it. So I came and I would talk to these kids, and we'd talk about space stations, or we'd talk about traditional science. We'd talk about what does it actually mean to be a scientist, and for me, it was very like it was a challenge, because it was like these things became more popular. Like we had 60 kids turning up to this talk, and the other not-for-profit that was there running the program, they decided to cut it. And then I was working at the uni, and they were still coming to the uni, the kids. And then that not-for-profit said, no, you can't, like told the uni that I couldn't operate my talks anymore. So like there was always that boundaries, right? That even though I was helping our people, there was always people trying to put up roadblocks. Then when I was at the uni, I knocked on every single professor's door. I emailed people like, I'm doing this science thing with Indigenous kids, and of course they all waved the flag like, we want to get more Indigenous people in the unis. But here was this Indigenous guy that was doing it, bringing all the community kids into the uni, but then all these roadblocks were just being put in place. And it was like, didn't disregard the fact that I've worked in STEM for like over 10 years. I've worked in the animal industry. It is a form of science. It was, oh, you're not a PhD, or you're not a doctor, so we're not gonna let you we're not gonna respect you. But then there was two professors that did, and they were really great. So these talks kept continuing, and I was my employer at the time was like, would tell me, you have to work back an extra 2 hours to get the extra hour off on a Friday, and things like that. And it was just. And then like things like I had Gamilaraay on my like email signature, and like, oh, take Gamilaraay off, or take DeadlyScience off. And it's like off my like petty shit like that, and so I took up a second job. I took up a second job. I started Googling remote communities. I found out that schools had very little books or literacy material, STEM literacy. So I started sending books. I dropped $1,000 at Dimmicks. I worked really, really hard. I was driving my Toyota Orion back from Duffy's Forest one time, and it was like 10 o'clock at night. I'd been up since 5 working, and And I like literally ran off the road pretty much because I nearly fell asleep. And it was at that point that I'd had this meeting with all these people that were interested in Indigenous STEM at the uni, and nothing really came of that. But then there was two people that told me to go get a GoFundMe page, and that was Alice Motion and Marianne Large, and they were really pivotal in that part of Deadly Science because I started sending these books off and putting on Twitter. It was probably about 2019, but I'd been doing it since 2018. I'd started to use my social media as kind of a weapon to get it out there, and then we raised things like $33,000 we raised, and then the logo, the Deadly Science logo, I started drawing on the back of a mouse card in a lab and a napkin as well. So I was drawing it, and I was not very good at drawing. I'm still not very good at drawing. And I made the decision to actually leave the lab because, I'd had a few comments from people like around my skin color, around, you're not that black anyway. And, just bullying me over cultural leave and things like that. So I just was like, you know what, I don't need to be part of this anymore. Like I've kind of ran my race with it. So I left that job and I went to the Matilda Centre, which was a great place to work. I loved it. And I started researching crystal methamphetamine and mental health in remote communities. And the second week I started there, I won the Young Australian in the year for New South Wales. I was like, oh shit, like, my life just completely changed from that moment. This Gamilaraay man from Dapto suddenly had a camera in his face, and it was really hard. Like, I had to learn how to speak to media. I had to learn how to, be the person. Like, I was suddenly a role model without ever, I never wanted to be a role model. Like, I was suddenly that person, and I was put in some really difficult positions at times, and like I probably could have handled it better, but hindsight's a wonderful thing, right? But I, my life from that moment has not been the same. Like I get to travel the country, I get to work with amazing kids and people, and we raised $250,000 off that GoFundMe page for Indigenous communities. And a lot of the time, like, you win awards and you get accolades and people celebrate you. Like I've met Lewis Hamilton, I've met all the F1 drivers pretty much. I've met Barack Obama, I've met them all. But the thing is that like I'm not very good at telling people my achievements. Like it's kind of like not what I do and set out to do, and it's not really a blackfella thing to do that. But it's one of those things where it's like I've done so much that I can never go back to being normal. I don't really want to go back to like working in a lab and being like, teased for being Aboriginal pretty much. But I just think that we can, like, I really do sometimes miss I sometimes do miss the anonymity of like being anonymous, and and in some places I am anonymous. Like most Australians probably don't even know who I am. But when the project featured Deadly Science on it, I turned my phone overheated and melted because of the notifications I got, and it kind of made me feel a bit of anxiety because I went to rugby training, and all the boys are just like watching the project. It's like they don't watch the project normally. They just knew I was on there, and they had the big screen, and they were watching it at training. And then I get there, and it's like like a couple of million people just saw you on national TV. It's like, yeah, it changes so much, and you can't let that get in your head. Like you can't. For me, it's not about like what I do is not about individual. Like I'm not an individual. It's about community. It's about our kids and what we can do for our kids. And how can we utilize this platform to do more good in our community and actually, I'm trying to just build stuff and really leave a legacy and like not an individual legacy, but a legacy for Deadly Science. And ideally the goal for me, from the 800 plus communities that we work with, is that one of our deadly scientists can be the CEO of DeadlyScience one day. And hopefully they look a bit better than me and they look a little bit more like Steve Jobs. But I'm hoping that, that's the case, and that's what I want for the future.
That's brilliant. I love that's your goal for the organization. Like, it's not about raising a certain amount of money or delivering a certain amount. It's to get that kid and get them to where you are now, and running that future and the science. It's fantastic, mate. For people who might not have heard of DeadlyScience, could you give us an overview of your day-to-day? What sort of programs are you running?
So day-to-day DeadlyScience is really interesting. So we do a lot of different things. So we've got a Deadly STEM Pathways program, which connects Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people with STEM jobs, just like what I had. They don't necessarily need a degree or a big piece of paper to do science or a STEM job or work in a lab or whatever. So that's one of our big programs. But we also have the resourcing program, which I've alluded to, with sending resources out to communities. And we also have the Deadly STEM in schools. So we go out to schools and we teach, kids and community just how to use microscopes. We talk about science, kind of like it's a evolution of how I started DeadlyScience. So that's like probably the oldest program. And I probably got a bit of ADHD brain because we cut down a lot of our programs, because I had probably about 12 programs just of ideas that I had, and I was just running them by myself. And then once you start to get staff, it's really hard to maintain the energy for a long period of time. We do another program called Deadly Learners, where STEM professionals actually Zoom in to schools or Skype in, that gives kids the access to like a paleontologist or a biologist or a criminologist, just making that accessible. Like, that is a real person that you can speak to. You can ask them about their career, about their life. Maybe there's a kid in the community that really resonates with that, and they'll remember the time they met a paleontologist and they'd want to be like a blackfella paleontologist or something like that. So there's that part of the program. There's also the other part of the program as well, is we've got we do this other thing called Deadly Labs, where we actually make kits with community. So we use cultural knowledge and make our own lab kits. So one of the ones we're doing at the moment is up at Robinson River in near Borroloola in the NT, and we're working with elders to make bush soap kits. And part of the reason for that is it's solutions based, because we have rheumatic heart disease in remote communities. Australia has the highest rates of rheumatic heart disease than anywhere in the world. So it's completely preventable disease, but one of the ways you can prevent it is by creating soap. And obviously with colonization, a lot of traditional knowledge has been taken and stolen and kind of deleted from history. So we're trying to revitalize that through lab kits. And that's the hope, that kids can, wash their hands and learn how to make bush soap, so that, these 500 kids go out to the local regions. Hopefully these kids can learn how to make the bush soap just like their aunties and uncles did, so they can avoid getting the infection that causes rheumatic heart disease. And we're doing more stuff like that too.
That's absolutely brilliant. I love the ideas, and I know what you mean when you say that you're trying to, you have all of these great ideas and you want to do all of them, but picking the ones that are most important is always tough. But that sounds like a really amazing program. I love the sound of that. Do you remember your first trip out to a remote school? What was that like?
Well, I pretty much came from a remote community. Though when I went out to Yirrkala one year. I went up to Badu in Torres Strait. Probably the most memorable one. And I've been to hundreds, right? So I've been to hundreds of communities. The most memorable one is probably Badu in Torres Strait, because when I got there, and this is not meant to be an egotistical thing, but I can understand if people see it that way. But it was like I was the Foo Fighters. Like, it was nuts. It was like the cheering, the screaming, like, you know, I got there and it's like these kids had just picked up my books, like they had, you know, they'd just been so excited about Deadly Science. And like, you know, you don't really, like, you gotta, you know, I spent 2 years in lockdown, right? So like most of my work was done online, or posting things at the post office. And then you go there in person and these kids just like, they, you know, in some cases, like I go to schools and stuff and there's football players, like NRL players, AFL players, and no one gives a crap about them. Like, it's really weird, right? So that's, you know, that's an ex-NRL player over there. It's like, you know, he used to be on TV all the time back in the day. But then, you know, the kids are just, they're like cuddling me and they're like, you know, talking about science and STEM. And it's a really strange feeling, but also like the thing that excites me about that is just a normal guy from Dapto. You know, if we could give that opportunity to, say, 10 Indigenous scientists and that platform, we could actually change the world. So that's why I really like that a lot. So I think that's the most memorable part for me, is the potential. Because if, yeah, like I said, I'm not perfect, and if, you know, kids are banging on the walls for me, what would they do for you know, Kirsten Banks or, you know, or someone like that? So I just think, you know, I just think there's so much potential there, and that's what I'm really looking forward to, and that's what excites me.
I love that you mentioned Kirsten Banks there. She's fantastic. I love her work. A brief interruption to do a quick shout out to Kirsten Banks. She's a Wiradjuri astrophysicist and brilliant science communicator who creates these awesome explainer videos about astronomy and space and astrophysics. So be sure to check out her work at AstroKirsten on social media. Okay, back to the podcast. But yeah, and that story of the Torres Strait just sounds exactly how I picture it up there. I really, really want to go up there one day. It sounds like an amazing part of the world.
It's an incredible part of the world, but also like it's a part of the world that like is so steeped in culture. And you know, the sad thing is about Australia, we think culture is like a cathedral that's like 200 years old. But you know, up there, there's just so much. There's just so much stuff. Like it's so deeply ingrained in the language and the names. And actually, I've gone on a journey and I've started writing a reptile book because I want to influence science now. And one of the ideas is that this reptile book is it's called Caution. This book contains deadly reptiles. And I want to actually change the names back to some of the traditional names, because some of these species are endemic to countries. So, for example, the broad-headed snake, which is there's only 700 of them left in the wild. The broad-headed name is a European name, but the Faroe and Yuin people would have had a name for this snake, which is more inclined to what it is. So if you looked at a broad-headed snake, you would see that it looks a bit like a python, a diamond python. And actually, the only recorded deaths of broad-headed snakes are actually of young men picking these snakes up, getting bitten by them, thinking it's only just a python, and then they die. So, you know, there's snakes like that. There's also snakes like the brown snake. Like, we call it a brown snake because everyone assumes it's brown, but brown snakes come in all different colors. They come in black, they come in white, they come in yellow. Tiger snakes, we assume that a tiger snake's just all got stripes, but they don't all have stripes. A death adder, we assume that it's, oh, wow, it's really dangerous, it's going to kill you. Yes, they are venomous, but they're actually deaf as in can't hear. It's been misspelt for hundreds of years. It's not an adder. Science tells us it's actually an elapid, which is related to the cobra brown snake. So Indigenous names are actually more like what they are. So some names for death adders around Australia that are Indigenous names, they mean ambush. And what are death adders? They are an ambush predator. So, you know, there's things like that I think that we need to be better at in science. And, you know, some of these names for things they are their traditional Indigenous names, but, for example, like Dugite, which is a white spotted brown snake, is a Noongar name. So I don't see why we can't influence herpetologists and scientists to actually rename some of these creatures to what they actually are. The other thing with that as well is that it makes me laugh a lot when I see a new snake or lizard discovered. Like, for example, the Wellesley death adder, right? Wellesley death adder is found in the Western Desert. It's a desert death adder. The guy who found it was Richard Wells, herpetologist, Hoser. But the Aboriginal people would have came across this snake for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. They already had a name for it. And someone comes along and just names it after themselves. It's like, there's two types of people in this world, right? There's people that name things after themselves, and there's people that don't name things after themselves. And I think it's just really important that, especially with animals that have a culture, that have a story, they're named after what they've been called for thousands and thousands of years. And if we don't know what they're called, then we should invest in the research to find out actually more about them and what they're called, because we have 500 different languages, and I just think it's really important.
Absolutely. It's it's a really important aspect of science, and I guess showing that respect to the first scientists of this nation and the people who knew it best from the very beginning. Absolutely.
We're a better nation if we include by how we treat our First Nations people, and that includes STEM as well. If we don't recognise Aboriginal people as doing STEM and only white men doing STEM, then we are limited. We're limited as people because we need all forms of science. We don't just need one form of science. We need all forms of science.
That's interesting. I guess Western culture does have a bit of a habit of saying, this is how you do science, and if you're not doing it this way, then you're not doing science. Have you encountered any tension when you're working in schools and that kind of thing? Yeah, yes and no. Like, I think the thing for me, right, is when, I've worked in juvenile justice settings, and I've had, non-Indigenous kids go, that's not science. But then you explain it to them and they go, oh, okay, I see it now. Like, and then, but, it's more the trolls online. Like, you constantly, like, before it never really was a thing because I didn't notice it as much. And I think last year I started to get a lot more of it, and I started to notice it, and I started to act out a bit because of it. But it's the hardest thing for me is when they involve my family, or like they go beyond the criticism. They go deeply personal. It's like I have no recourse to fight back, because if I fight back, then I look like an idiot, or like I look like I can't take criticism or whatever. But then it's like you're actually helpless. Like, and I had people send me death threats online. I had people send me death threats in person. For what? Providing resources to Indigenous children. And like it just, anything that you can kind of like, that a normal person would just like rationalize as being a bit like, why would someone do that? It's happened. So it's like, for me, it's like, I think it's really important that you do stay grounded. And there's so many times when my wife said, don't post that or don't respond, and I didn't listen to her and responded, and it was way worse. So, I've gotten better at listening to her and listening to the people around me, because, when you grow up kind of like what I did, you're kind of on your own a lot. But then, life changes, you get older, and you're not only on your own anymore, you're part of a team. And like, that is marriage for me. Like, I'm part of a team, right? And if you're going off and doing things without your team, then you're going to suffer the consequences. And I think for me, like, I've learned not to respond as much. Occasionally I'll get into a tiff with a bot. But that's because I want to control AI. But occasionally I'll get into a tiff with a bot, and like
it's a bit of fun, but it does affect you. The online bullying, like, I'd be lying if I said that it didn't get in my head, or like it didn't didn't affect me in any way. Because like when I went on Sunrise a couple of months ago, and all these people, like there's like 2 or 3 people, right? Everyone else is like, this is great, like, well done, young brother. But then there's like 2 or 3 people commenting, oh, he's white, he's not Aboriginal. How the hell is he Aboriginal, and all that kind of stuff. And you do get offended by that, because it's like, look at me, I've got a big brown nose, big brown eyes, I'm tan, like I am Indigenous. That's my heritage. That's my culture. But then it's like, it's one of those things where it does get in your head, because it's like, these people are making comment based off no knowledge. They don't know me. And it's only 2 or 3 of them, and you're reading the negative comments around because they stand out, right? They're like the Rivers ads. If you're in Australia, you have like Harvey Norman, right? And it's like, Harvey Norman. It's like all sexy and fireworks and really loud. And then you have the boring Rivers ads. They're like, oh yeah, buy these Crocs, and they're really, really great. That's what those negative comments are like, because you might have a positive story and you have 1,000 great comments, and the negative ones just stick out like nails in a piece of wood. And you want to be able to defend your family and yourself, and you really can't. Like, you can't. Like, there's no recourse for these people. They don't understand the damage that they do. They don't understand the pain that they cause others. And if they did, like, sometimes I just think they just say it to get a kick. They say it gets them a reaction, but that's not how I want to live my life. And I don't want to be caught in that negativity. So it is tough. Like, it has caused me immense pain and grief. But, if I was to, if I'm going to be a parent in a couple of years, then I can't let things like that bother me, because that's going to affect my family. And I want to be the best dad or the best parent that I could be. And if I'm going to let people who don't know me off the internet cause me significant pain and harm, then I can't be the dad or the parent that I need to be. So I've had to really work on myself with that.
Could you talk a little bit about those strategies for when those times come? I'm thinking of Stan Grant as you're talking about all of this, and having to take some time away to cope with exactly what you're talking about right now. How do you get yourself in that headspace?
Yeah, for me, it's like it's been really difficult to find that niche for me. I tried lots of things. I tried fishing. I tried going down and just wetting a line in and fishing, and you do get a bit of a thrill, but it's only temporary, right? Like, it's only a temporary fix. It was probably about this time last year, and I'd come through all of it. I ruined my honeymoon because I went and caught COVID because I pushed myself too hard, and I went to a school and we had to cancel our honeymoon. And then, things started to change for me around the back end of the year, where I really started to let go of, like, what's been said about me. Anything that's bad that's been said about me has already been said on the internet multiple times. So, it's like having a nude photo on the internet. Once you got a nude photo on the internet, you've lost it all, right? Like, you don't need to worry anymore, because it's like anything that it's ever been done or said is already on there. So it's kind of like how I feel about that. Like, I sort of had to learn that, and I guess strategies for me is that I like eating food, but that's not a good strategy. I really enjoy listening to audiobooks. So like a lot of the time I just don't read Twitter. Like, I'll post on there, but I won't read anything. Occasionally I'll read some tweets. I'll like them. I'll engage, but I engage where I want to engage. Once I feel like my bottle is getting full, I don't go on the app. I don't go on Facebook. I mainly use Hootsuite on Instagram, but I pay for the premium stuff, so you don't see that. You think that I'm just posting it, but actually I'm just scheduling it. I play with my dog. I go out and play with my dog. And like,
What sort of dog have you got?
I got a Dachshund Cross Labrador, and my dog doesn't care. Like, she doesn't care if someone thinks I'm an asshole on the internet. Like, she doesn't care, right? So to me, she's like the best because she's a no judgment kind of thing. Like, so I probably post too many photos of my dog, but love my dog, love my chickens. Like, I go out and sit with my chickens. I go out for walks. I talk to my sister, I talk to my network. As you get bigger and more popular and your social network gets bigger, your network privately gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And that for me is like, you've just got to keep those that have been around, that actually care, that have been there from the beginning around, and bring them in and be honest with them. And, I'm very lucky. I have, I have a very strong wife. I have her family really strong. My family really strong, even though they live pretty far away. Like, they care enough about me to sort of say, like, Corey, you need to slow down. You need to put the brakes on, or like, and you need to listen to that. You can't not listen to people when you truly love them and they're around. Like, you gotta listen to people. It's a big thing for me.
Absolutely. I remember when I was sort of researching you a bit prior to this conversation, basically everywhere you're mentioned online, the standard introduction seems to be CEO of DeadlyScience and proud Gamilaraay man. And you talked about it before. I love that you've got it in your email signature, by the way. We've talked a bit about your role as CEO, but tell me, what does being Gamilaraay mean to you?
It means a lot to me because, that's who I am. That's my identity. That's my pop. That's my mum. It's my dad as well. Like, people don't really realize this, but I'm Aboriginal on both my parents' sides. So, when I grew up, being Aboriginal wasn't cool, right? Like, I was called all different sorts of names in primary school. We never did acknowledgements to country. We never had, place was never spoken about. And when I say about place, like, I'm now on the lands of the Biripi people. That's where I live and work, and we never spoke about that. My grandfather, people would literally cross the street to avoid him because he was a black man. And so I've grown up with this, it's hard for me because I absolutely love, like, my culture and my people. I always have, always will. But now you go from being, ostracized by society to now being celebrated. Like, it's the equivalent of being out and jumping into an ice bath. And just the experience of that. It's like deer in the headlights stuff. And then there's this racist undertone in society that are waiting for me to fuck up or, like, commit a crime or be drunk somewhere, or, like, so there's this pressure of being a public person, being an Aboriginal person. You're accountable to community, but you're also accountable to society on a much higher level than anyone else. So, I got punched in the head playing rugby last year by this, like, ex-bikie, and he just belted the crap out of me, and I couldn't do anything. I just got to take it. So I stood there and took his punches, and I couldn't throw a punch back because the chances are that, someone pulls out a phone and goes, oh, look, the young Australian of the year and Gamilaraay man gets into a fight with a guy in a rugby field, so there's no way you can defend yourself. There's no way you can, you have to be mindful that people have smartphones. People, they want to cut you down. And it might be a race thing. It might not be a race thing, but it's a thing that you just need to be mindful of. And, like, young people make mistakes, and I'm a young person and I make mistakes. But you got to be mindful of the situations you put yourself into. So being a Gamilaraay man is everything to me. Like, I'm not Australian. I'm a Gamilaraay man. I'm Indigenous. That's my place. My place is Gamilaraay country. I am a proud Aboriginal man. And for me, being Gamilaraay is beyond all else. Like I'm an Aboriginal man, but I'm also a husband. I'm also a friend. I'm also a brother. I'm also an uncle. Maybe one day a father. Like that's who I am. That's me, and that's what my kids are going to be. They're going to be Gamilaraay as well because that's in their family. That's their history. And I think that it's not really necessarily a spiritual thing. It's a physical thing too. Like, I don't, like, even though I've got fair skin, I don't look white. Like people always guess my background. They always go, "Are you Greek? Are you Lebanese?" Or, but then when you say, you're like, "Oh, actually, in fact, I'm Aboriginal." It's like, no, you can't be. You can't be Aboriginal. It's like, well, you're saying I'm Greek. Like I've had someone say I'm Samoan once, and it's like, really? Like, I've got no Samoan ancestry. I've got Aboriginal ancestry and Dutch ancestry. That's my mob, right? That's my people. And I think that, I'm proud of where I've come from. I'm proud of my family. I'm proud of all my mob. We fight every day for equality, but, my mob are successful people. They're teachers, they're doctors, they work in some of the most complex jobs. They write books. They teach young women how to cook. In Redfern, my mob are like incredibly gifted people, and it's in our DNA. And really, I am just a snippet, a tiny tip of an iceberg of just incredible people that don't get the opportunities that I get. So I'm very, very privileged for that. And I do find it weird sometimes that I just, I do get these, accolades and stuff because there's so many amazing people that I know that deserve them as well.
It was going to be a question a bit later on, but I'll ask you now. Who are some organisations or people that inspire you? Who would you like to give a shout out to?
I really like Redfern Youth Connect. Ani Markamono. I mean, she works with so many deadly young people. I think ID Know Yourself, as they adore, like, Children's Ground, Common Ground, National Youth Education Coalition. Like, they're all people, Indigenous Literacy Foundation, they're all people like, non-Indigenous people like to make us compete with each other. And there's no real competitors in charities, right? Like, because we're all trying to solve the same problems. Everyone's got their own way of doing it. But, when it comes to funding and it comes to like corporates and things like that, they all try to make us compete with each other. They all try to make us jealous of each other. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is that we need to support each other as an organisation. So, really any Indigenous charity or organisations working with young people, we need to be actually, mindful and be fair to each other. And what we've got to do with that is we've got to make sure that we need to make sure that we're actually supporting each other. And so I would like to give a shout out to all those organisations, that are working with our people, not just Indigenous, but young people that are struggling with the ways of the world. And those people, especially, being Indigenous orgs, again, they've got the same jobs as normal charity founders, but they've got the added expectation of, basically being Indigenous. And like that's, it's just one of those things.
No, they all sound like they're doing really amazing work in community. So, good on you for shouting out to those people. Just to quickly recap all of those NGOs. So we had Redfern Youth Connect. They're an Aboriginal-led youth organisation in the inner south of Sydney. ID Know Yourself is a mentoring program for Indigenous kids living in the out-of-home or foster care system. Children's Ground are working to improve the lives of Indigenous children through First Nations knowledge and systems of governance. Common Ground is an NGO seeking to amplify Indigenous culture and stories. The National Indigenous Youth Education Council are striving to create a more equitable education system in Australia. And the Indigenous Literacy Foundation is an organisation working with remote communities to develop literacy materials in Indigenous languages. They're all fantastic organisations, so go out and support them. All right, back to the podcast. I want to ask you about your toughest, most challenging day or experience working for DeadlyScience, but I also want to ask you about your best, most rewarding day or experience. I'll let you decide which one you want to talk about first.
So they're probably both. They're both the same day. It was 2019, and I was, I'd been working with this school for a particularly long time, and something that not a lot of people know about me, or maybe they do know about me, but I spend a lot of my time teaching young kids how to read. And there's a group of kids that I've been teaching how to read via Zoom. It's like the start of lockdown. It was probably back end of 19, and there was this little girl that was part of a class, and tragically she died. She passed away of her own hand, and she was only like 9 years old, and it killed me, like absolutely killed me. I was about to throw it all away, and I still, it's still, and there's two kids really for me that will make sure that I do this forever, and that was. For me, it was gut wrenching because it's like, I'd invested so much time into this kid. She had so much potential and just, I still can't fathom why I got to that point. But, that day I was ready to give it in, and I had a Deadly Learners lesson booked in with some kids. They're from, they're from Currim House, which is like this boarding house in North Queensland. And I was in my bed and I was just blubbering, man. I was just crying. I was crying so much. I don't think I've ever cried so much in my life. Because I just deep regret. Like, even though it's not my fault, I blamed myself for many years after that. But then I got rid of I sort of cancelled the Deadly Learner session because I just wasn't in the right mind space for it. But then the kids rang me and I had one of the girls there, her name was Talia, read me this book it's called Daddy Penguins or something like that. It's a penguin book. And she read it from start to finish. And she just wanted me to hear her read this book from start to finish. And there was nothing that was going to stop her from doing that. And that was one of the reasons why I kept going, because it's like, wow, like that's the impact right there. And then there's this other kid that I met who was in a wheelchair and had cerebral palsy, and she's no longer with us, but I tried to build a telescope for her because she just wanted to see the stars. And I thought, surely there's someone that does telescopes for people with disabilities. Turns out there wasn't. And I'd had some luck emailing Brian Cox, and I got a bit back from him. He couldn't help me. I emailed Elon Musk. He definitely couldn't help me. Didn't care. I tried. I tried everywhere. I was quoted $40,000 for a prototype model, but I didn't have the money at the time. But then I did the next best thing, and I got a light projector, and I projected the lights around this kid, and gave her that moment of we might not be able to bring we might not be able to bring you to the stars, but we can bring the stars to you. And we're all made of this bit of stardust. That's astronomy, right? We're all made of these atoms that when the Big Bang happened, that's how we became double-celled organisms. That's how we became living, So explain that to her, and then I got this light projector and I turned off the lights and basically gave this kid this planetarium experience. And it was kind of the smile and just her journey of she's got a disability. I'll never understand what it's like to be her. I can think I can understand, but I will never understand. And if I tried to understand and I tried to act like I knew what she felt or goes along with it, then I would be doing her injustice, because I don't know and I don't experience that. So, but the smile on this kid's face just gave me it gave me the fuel and the reason why I do what I do. sometimes as a young person, I slip up. Like last year, I reacted to trolls and, wanted to take on the world and wanted to fight everyone. But really, I go back to that reason why I do what I do. And that is the magic of Deadly Science. That's why this simple white logo on a black shirt means something. And it means something to so many people is because of those moments. And for me, in a perfect world, I can bring more Indigenous people and they can run this, but they can have their own moment like that. And for my staff, the beauty of what this is, they've all had a similar moment where they've saw what Deadly Science is. There's something about it that brings people together, and it creates an acceptance. An acceptance that we are all here for a finite amount of time, and we should just make science just so enjoyable. And I think that for me is just like, I am getting so many racist sort of people come up to me about The Voice and stuff to Parliament, but they don't see what I see. They don't see the pain that I see, but they don't also see the good. Like, they don't see the good things. So I just ignore them at the moment. But, we don't even have a constitutional recognition. But we're so disconnected from what is good and what is powerful that story, unless you're there and you see the photos of it, people can feel it when I talk to them about it. But it's a great sadness and a crime that not everyone gets to experience those moments. And I think that, we should be, whether we're running a charity or running a business or running a podcast or whatever we're doing, we should be looking to create those moments for people, because those moments are what make us human and what makes humanity beautiful.
Mate, I am absolutely blown away by, firstly, your resilience and just this resounding positivity that you have. It's infectious, and I can tell that you're an incredible role model for the kids that you're working with. So, yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. I have a couple of quick fire questions that I'm planning on asking everyone. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. First up, you're allowed to pick one person, living or dead, and you get to live their entire life from start to finish. So you pause your life right now, you get to live their whole life, experiencing everything they experience, and then you come back to your life with all of their memories. Who do you choose?
Well, my grandmother died when she was 42, and I'm watching a very close family member die the same thing. So it's like, for me, it's I would really like to go back and be two people if I could. I would love to be my grandfather and my grandmother, because they got together in a time where, it was, they were two people that, like, society told that they couldn't be together, but they found a way, and then when she died, my grandfather drove my nan's body from Armidale all the way down to Koroit in Victoria, rented the hearse himself. And I often find myself writing about it, like, as an author and a creator, like, I write about the journey. Like, I think about the journey a lot. And I would love to just been on that journey, not because, I know it sounds really weird, but I would have loved to experience the pain that they felt, but also the journey of, like, taking her body back to Koroit. It would have been a mad, like, it would have been unheard of back then, because there wasn't major highways. It was all bush roads. I'm sure he would have got a flat tire or two. He would have gone hungry. It would have been really difficult. And if I could go back and experience that story, so I could have those memories for my children and people today, so that I could share that, because for me, that's true love, like right there. Like, and for me, when I was getting married and stuff, I asked myself the question, would I do that for my wife? Of course I would. Like, I would. So that's how I knew that probably she was the one, because that whole, and most people probably would do that for someone else, but that for me is a massive journey. And like, this is Australia, where it was, if you're a black man, you weren't even really considered, and like 3 or 4 years earlier, you were considered a fauna, like you were considered an animal. So, there's still that highly public racist tone. So it's like driving through the towns, especially a lot of those bigger towns, all those country towns that, probably hadn't grown with the rest of Australia from that point. I'd just imagine what he experienced, and I kind of wish that I had have experienced that to an extent, or just had a window to it, because then I would probably understand and appreciate my life now more. I do appreciate my life and I appreciate my privilege, but then I would probably appreciate my privilege even more if I had experienced it in some way. And sounds really weird, but that's kind of what I'd do.
No, I've asked that question to quite a few people, and it's interesting. You get two groups. You get the people who pick someone interesting from history and that kind of thing, and then you get the people who go for a family member or that connection to ancestry. And I find it really interesting when, there's something special about the people who go straight to ancestry when it comes to that question. All right, question 2. You wake up tomorrow and you've been elected, let's say, education minister. You can be prime minister if you want to, but you're in charge of, I guess, education in Australia. And you can assume you don't have to worry about the trolls. Everyone's on board with your ideas. You don't have to stress about getting enough votes. What's the first thing that you change about the current system?
It's a difficult one because, we have 500 different plus nations in Australia. They all think differently. They all have different cultural customs, languages, and such. What I would do is I would probably blow up the curriculum a bit, but I would invest in grassroots organisations. I think the best, history has told us and still tells us today that the best organisations that have the most impact are those on a local level. And they're important. So I think that I would do that. I would go back in time and I would blow up the curriculum, but also I would make sure that the government funding goes to localised organisations that work with local kids. So we're not parachuting charities and like organisations into communities and then they're leaving after 6 months and leaving a massive hole in the community after they've built something and they have to leave. I would make sure that there's localised funding for everything.
I love that. That's a great response. A final question for you. If people were to donate money to DeadlyScience, what sorts of things would that money go towards?
It goes towards getting us out into schools, resources, staff to do it as well. Doesn't go to me. I actually pay myself a really small amount from DeadlyScience. So it goes into helping us create change. So if you can spare $1 or $2, that is really fantastic and great. But if you can't, then that's fine too. But obviously, any contribution that you make goes back into our communities and our kids, and that's really important to us. So anything you can do is great. But yeah, I understand that like wallets are getting tighter, interest rates are getting higher. So some people may not be able to afford to donate to DeadlyScience, but to me, it's really important that that your donations are not wasted. They go into changing lives and helping people.
Brilliant. Well, the idea with this podcast is that every month I chat to a different founder or director of a not-for-profit organisation, And then I also run a Patreon where people can sort of support this project with half the money going directly to the NGOs every month. So on behalf of all the wonderful people that support this project, I'll be making a donation of around $200 to Deadly Science very shortly. So a big thank you to everyone who supports that. That's coming straight from those amazing people. And a very big thank you to you as well, Corey Tutt, CEO of Deadly Science and proud Gamilaraay man. And thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I really, really enjoyed it.
No worries. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for your time. It's really great. So thank you for having me on your program.
No worries. Well, take it easy, mate. Good luck with the book launch. I hope it all goes well. Go out and buy This Book Thinks You're Deadly. And thanks for taking the time, Corey.
Thanks so much. Cheers. Bye.
Wow. How about that for a first guest on the Protect the World podcast? I've followed Corey's work for a while now, but he still blew me away with some of those responses. I had a bunch of questions prepared, but I found myself so enthralled by Corey's storytelling that I barely even looked at them. And I was always a little caught off guard whenever he finished talking, because I felt like I was an audience member listening to some great storyteller. And then all of a sudden he'd stop and I'd remember that I'm actually conducting an interview here. There were a few parts of the conversation that really stood out to me, and this was the first one.
They don't see what I see. You know, they don't see the pain that I see, but they don't also see the good. Like, they don't see the good things.
Corey's anecdote about his best and worst day highlights the extreme nature of working in the Indigenous not-for-profit sector in Australia. And I'm sure it will resonate with a lot of people who've worked in remote communities. The harsh realities of what goes on in some pockets of Australia are out of sight and out of mind for the majority of the population. But as Corey emphasises, so too is the overwhelming beauty that is contained in these pockets. The resilience of these communities and the captivating essence of their cultures. It's absolutely enthralling. So if you're an Australian who's never experienced that, go out and see it for yourself, because words just don't do it justice. The other piece of advice I loved from Corey was this.
I think, we're really quick to draw on anger because anger is an accelerant for change. And when you have an accelerant and you put it on fire, it burns too quickly and the fire burns out. But if you are to, chuck a log in every now and again or manage a fire and keep it going, then you create change over time.
It's easy, particularly in this age of social media, to get angry about injustice. It's easier to list all the things that shouldn't be, rather than come up with new ideas for how things should be. And learning how to throw a log on the fire every now and then, instead of burning out, is an essential skill for anyone embarking upon social change. Lastly, I want to re-emphasize Corey's message to be kind to ourselves.
There's all different types of the spectrum in people that are undertaking this kind of work. But there's one thing we all have in common, and that's we're all our own harshest critics. So, it is what it is, but you got to be kind.
This was certainly something I needed to hear when I was tirelessly tinkering with the audio for this podcast, or spending half an hour trying to choose a font for the thumbnail. But when it comes to creating social change, it's all about intention, not execution, especially in the beginning. If you'd like to support Deadly Science, you can donate to them directly by visiting deadlyscience.org.au. And you can follow them at Deadly Science on all the usual social media channels. On behalf of our incredible supporters, I was able to make a donation of $200 to Deadly Science. If you'd like to help me give more money to more amazing NGOs in the future, please consider signing up to the Patreon via the link in the show notes for as little as $5 a month. Another big thank you to everyone who supports this podcast, and to Corey Tutt for being keen to be the very first guest on it. I hope you found him as inspiring as I did, and I'll see you next month for another episode of Protect the World.